With that said, you can.
So with your permission, can we come to the session, please?
Please, Siddharth. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone who are present today in our this webinar. I extend a warm welcome to our respected principal, our beloved lecturers, professors of various universities and colleges, members of the Janata Education Society, the alumni members, the advocates, members of the Advocates Association, the dear students and other participants who are with us today. This webinar series is organized by Janata Education Society's Vivekananda College of Law in collaboration with the Alumni Association, which is an initiative of IQAC. In this first webinar series, we are delighted to have today Smt B V Vidyulatha, an advocate practicing in Bangalore, who is the managing partner of Messrs. Law Point, a firm in Bangalore, who will address us on the topic human rights violations during pandemic. I request our beloved principal of Vivekananda College of Law, Dr. K.B. Kempegowda sir, to introduce today's speaker, please.
Thank you, Siddharth. Today's guest speaker and an alumna of our institution and an outstanding student awardee also, Smt B V Vidyulatha, and all the invitees, members of Alumni Association, and my friends. Today's webinar is on the violation of human rights during pandemic. Being a practicing advocate, Vidyulatha is defending the people, those who are in need, before court of law. She is an erudite speaker, no doubt in it. Let me give her brief profile to you. She has completed her BSc Botany from Bangalore University, and she joined our institution in 2001 and passed out in 2003, enrolled as an advocate in 2003, started her career as an advocate in the law chambers of Senior Counsel Shri P.S. Manjunath, Tilak Hegde Law Chambers from 2004 to 2005. Thereafter, she started working in the law chambers of designated Senior Counsel Shri T.R. Subbanna before starting her independent practice in Bangalore in the year 2009. She has been conducting various civil litigation before various tribunals, trial court, high court, and also in the Supreme Court. Public interest litigation has been a branch of interest for her from the beginning. In association with Legal Services Committee, she has been working in the areas relating to violation of rights of children, the underprivileged, mentally challenged, and that of provisions of relating to environmental law. Presently, she is a panel advocate to the Karnataka State Commissions for Child Rights. She was adjudged, as I said, as the outstanding student of the year, and she represented our institution in various international and national moot court competitions. Her team still I remember consisting of Vidyulatha, Rakshit, and Anil as a researcher. They brought laurels to the institution. They won several moot court competitions. Still, we remember you, Vidyulatha. Whenever there is a call from our side, she used to visit our institution and orient our students, particularly freshers. And with this brief introduction, it is my pleasure to welcome Srimati B V Vidyulatha on this occasion. Welcome to you, Vidyulatha. Can you hear me, Vidyulatha?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Welcome to you, Ma. And we have amidst us the office bearers of Janata Education Society and the members of Janata Education Society, office bearers of our Advocates Association, office bearers and members of our Alumni Association, and professors from various other institutions, and my students' friends from various other institutions are here. I welcome all of you. A warm welcome is reserved to you, and I welcome my colleagues and my beloved students for this program. Once again, I welcome you, Vidyulatha. Welcome, one and all. Over to you, Siddharth.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. Before commencing today's lecture, I request all the participants to fill in the participation and feedback forms in the links which are provided in the comment box. E-certificates for participations will be provided by the institution. The session will be for a period of 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session for about 10 minutes. Participants who have any questions may kindly post those questions in the comment box. We will be able to take up a few questions as the time permits. I request all the participants to please mute your audios and videos during the session. Vidyulatha ma'am, over to you. Could you please comment the session?
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you, sir. You've always been kind to me, and today is no exception for it. Traveling to my roots has always brought me a great amount of happiness. So today, being with our respected principal, my teachers, Kalpana madam especially, and of course my dear friends and the present college mates, is a matter bringing immense pleasure to me, and of course a great honor. Today, I'm expected to speak about human rights violations during the pandemic. The topic in itself is not new to any of us. It is still fresh in our memory. It's still happening. There is so much material on the topic that we could go on for days without even a brief stop. But Anil and Siddharth have told me, ma'am, not a minute more than 45 minutes. So at the end of today's session, I just intend to rake up a few questions in all our minds that would necessitate us to think more deeply about the topic. So we begin. Why is it that there is so much sensitization all over the world regarding human rights and its violations in today's world? What really are these human rights? These rights, which are now termed as human rights, were always there with us. Probably earlier, they were known as natural rights. These rights are not there with us only because it is given to us by our state or by it is identified in the international level. We are all born with these rights. These rights are not there because we are born in a particular region, or we belong to a particular gender or ethnicity, or we profess a certain religion, or have a particular skin color. These rights are there in us because we are born as human beings. I would say even before we are born as human beings, when we talk of gender discrimination, rights of a mother, rights of unborn, so the rights are there even before I'm born as a human being, and till my body is disposed in a dignified manner, the rights continue to stay with me. So, right before we are born, till we are disposed of, or our bodies are disposed of as human beings, these rights are there. They are inherent in us. They are there regardless of any nationality, sex, ethnic origin, color, religion, language, any status. Maybe our country or any state is higher economically, socially than any other country. Doesn't matter. All of us, by virtue of being born as human beings, have these inherent rights and we have them equally. Equality is the inherent character of these human rights. They range from the most fundamental, the right to life and equality, to those rights that make life worth living, such as rights to food, education, work, health, and liberty. Many of the basic ideas that have given rise to the human rights movement has developed as an outcome of the Second World War and the events of the Holocaust. This has culminated in adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Paris by the United Nations General Assembly in the year 1948. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, probably is the first legal document to set out the fundamental human rights to be universally protected. The rights which were already there in us were identified in an international platform. That is what this declaration did. It did not give us any right for the first time. It identified that internationally or universally, we are all protected by certain rights. Even today, this document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, continues to be the foundation of all international human rights law. It has 30 articles which provide for the principles and building blocks of the current and future human rights conventions, treaties, and other legal documents. What then are the characters, the basic characters of human rights? I would categorize it into three things: equality, and they are non-discriminatory. What the basic character of human rights is all humans are to be treated equally. That is why Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states all human beings are born and equal in dignity and rights. Now, we are born free and we are equal in dignity and rights. The second article, which provides for freedom from discrimination, ensures this equality among all the human beings. So Article 1 and 2 ensures that all human beings are equal and there is no discrimination between the human beings all over the world. Non-discrimination cuts across all international human rights law. This principle is present in all major human rights treaties. It also provides the central theme for two core instruments: the International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the Convention on the Elimination on All Forms of Discrimination against Women. So if equality and non-discriminatory character was the first character, it being the rights being universal and inalienable is the second character. As I already said, the human rights are universal in character, in that all of us being born as human beings have these rights universally. There is no discrimination based on anything, and they're inalienable in the normal course of things. Specific situations, except in specific situations, just like reasonable restrictions on our fundamental rights, they can be taken away only by due process of law. There can be restriction of movement of a person guilty of offense. That is allowed, but otherwise, all the rights are inalienable. They are universal and inalienable. So that leads us to the third basic character. They are indivisible and interdependent. Naturally, if I promise somebody that all of them are equal, then I also have to promise them that they would not be discriminated among each other. Equality without discrimination, they do not exist independent of each other. All the rights, hence, are indivisible and interdependent. Let's say one set of rights cannot be enjoyed fully without the other. For example, we could see any progress made in civil and political rights makes it easier to exercise economic, social, and cultural rights. So all these rights are interdependent. So if I violate the economic, if there is violations of economic, social, and cultural rights, it can negatively affect the other rights. So today's topic specifically, I need to speak about violations of human rights during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw 2 world wars, and the Second World War led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Wars of any kind, especially the world wars, increase the violations of human rights exponentially. We see an exponential rise in human rights abuses, violations during any wars. Pandemic, I would say, is a war, a world war between COVID-19 virus and the humans across the globe. So this also has resulted in exponential rise in violations, human rights abuses. Human rights violations never ever disappeared from earth. Though they were identified, there were declarations, conventions, treaties, signatories to the treaties, any number of treaties. Human rights violations never ever disappeared from earth. But due to its recognition in the international community, the graph of violation was not rising exponentially. But the pandemic has deepened and worsened the pre-existing human rights violation problems, particularly to the most vulnerable. The vulnerable were already facing human rights violations. The vulnerable as in minorities, the aged, the children, the underprivileged, the socio-economically weaker sections of the nations or groups of those nations, persons belonging to certain ethnicity. All these people are the vulnerable lot, the migrants, the transgenders, the children. These are already facing human rights violations. But the pandemic, it deepened and worsened the situation. It increased human rights violations. I would say, knowingly or unknowingly, all of us have contributed to this human rights violations during the pandemic. I will take this to a little later. The United Nations Human Rights Commissioner, Madam Michelle Bachelet, said what started as a two-dimensional human rights crisis, the COVID-19, which started as a two-dimensional human rights crisis, which started as a health emergency, has quickly descended into social and economical sphere as well. In the beginning of the pandemic, 2019 and early part of 2020, we thought it is an emergency situation only relating to health. So many countries adopted different measures. There were quarantine measures, there were lockdown measures. Different countries adopted different measures. But what did it all lead to? It led to social and economic crisis. What started as an health emergency has now widened its scope, and it is now a social and economic, in the social and the economic sphere. We have been reading news, we have been watching news about the unrest, the looting, in many countries already. This is nothing but the result of the enlargement of this issue in the sphere of social and economic spheres. Though the vulnerable group of people who had to deal not just with the health emergency, but due to the lockdown measures, the quarantine measures adopted by different nations to contain this fast spreading virus, are the ones who are affected globally. The United Nations Human Rights Office has identified the ongoing human rights violations in a number of countries. It has also cited specific heightened risks of rights violations against the already vulnerable population, including, as I already told you, the indigenous people, older persons, migrants, the minorities, the transgenders, the disabled, so on and so forth. When we think of the human rights violations during this pandemic, what strikes us first? We travel through the pandemic with the virus. What happened in Wuhan, in China, the later part of 2019, there was restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. We have read reports about Chinese doctors, Chinese scientists being questioned using force by the authorities, asking them not to spread the information about the virus in the early part of its rise. It is reported today that at least 91 countries have experienced restrictions on the news media as a part of their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. A recent report by the Human Rights Watch found that at least 83 countries had used COVID-19 as a justification to attack free speech. Especially during the rise of the coronavirus, the Chinese regime threatened, arrested, jailed, and silenced the whistleblowers, the citizen journalists who tried to warn or report the pandemic in its early days. There are grave concerns that the surveillance technology that are used to quarantine the individuals has rolled out as a part of effort to combat the coronavirus could be used further to stifle the dissent and to violate the human rights. We have read about articles on Twitter blocking the shared post by Brazil's Ministry of Health on January 13th, 2021, which urged people to seek early treatment for COVID-19 infections. Twitter said, the Twitter post just said, don't wait, go to a health unit and request early treatment. In blocking the tweet, Twitter said, this tweet violated the Twitter rules about spreading misleading and potentially harmful information relating to COVID-19. Various social networks applied anti-spam measures for the content posted about the COVID virus. Facebook has allegedly censored information content about the virus, according to the users. But Facebook claimed it was a bug that was responsible for blocking these contents. YouTube has demonetized several videos in which the term corona was used, but the demonetization was cited under the rules of sensitive content. So once there is restriction on freedom of speech and expression, what is its corollary? My right to information is again violated. If the Chinese doctor or the scientist or a reporter is prevented from reporting a virus or its spreading, my right, that is the right of the entire world to know about the virus in its early stages, is also violated. So there has been global crackdown on opposition activists and human rights defenders, increased attacks on journalists, and moves to curb free speech, censor the media, roll out invasive tracking apps, and put in extreme surveillance measures, many of which they say is likely to outlast the virus. So suppression of information directly led to freedom of information to the entire world. So here there is suppression of information, and here there is violation of the right to know for the entire world. What did this lead to? This led to massive outbreak of the virus. which leads us to the next violation, the right to health. Did all countries have, or all citizens of all countries have the same access to health? No, we did not. We saw massive violations of right to health. Right to health is an integral part of right to life. Italy was one of the earliest violations of right to health. The medical personnel had to decide whom they would treat. They had, due to high volume of patient inflow, doctors were forced to decide on whether or not to treat the elderly or leave them to die. Wasn't this violation of human rights? A photo of a nurse who collapsed due to huge workload in an Italian hospital was widely circulated as a symbol of overwhelmed system. Libya, which is already in war situation, faced worse situations in violations due to right to health, because hospitals were being constantly bombed. They were attacked. Our own country faced worst lot of discrimination. All of us did not get the same level of treatment. Economically influential people got better treatment than the vulnerable lot. There are people who did not get the same level of treatment. They did not get the same bed as some economically or some influential person, which resulted in suffering and death due to shortage of bed, oxygen, medicine, medical personnel. The list goes on. Even today, we are in a state of discrimination because of vaccination shortage. There is huge shortage of vaccination in our country even today. Not only in our country, even globally. Only few nations are able to afford vaccination. Is this not violation of human rights? Then, even today, vaccination is globally impossible for many groups of individuals who are suffering. Immunization, it leads us to immunization. Nearly 23 million children around the world are said to have missed the routine childhood immunization, the vaccination, not the COVID-19 vaccination, the other vaccinations. Last year, due to disruptions from the pandemic, this is what a report from the World Health Organization reports. In a new analysis released recently, they say many children in the Asian and the Middle Eastern countries are not immunized from 1.5 to 2 years. This would lead to serious disruption in the health of these children, which would lead to a second pandemic, not due to COVID-19, but due to shortage in healthcare. India represented the largest increase in children not receiving their first diphtheria, tetanus, DTP vaccine from 2019 to 2020. It reported more than 3 million children did not receive their first DTP vaccine, and up to 1.4 million children did not get the shot in the 2019. If the trend remains, it continues. If children are not immunized, if babies are not immunized as per the schedule, there would be serious problems around the world. This violation of right to health, which looks like it's just a transitory violation, would continue for years. These children who are going to live for another 30, 40, 50, 60 years would not be in the best of their health because they have missed their immunization because the country was unable to provide immunization due to whatever restraint, but the children would be the ones who suffer all this. So This leads us to the next important discrimination. Was there really freedom from discrimination during the pandemic? We said there was curbing of dissemination of data, dissemination of information. There was no health opportunities available equally to everybody. Then, was there no discrimination in the other fields? There was discrimination. Racism, xenophobia was at its height. There have been increased reports of racism against Asian people, particularly the Chinese people. We have even heard a president of a country using the word Chinese virus instead of the word coronavirus. Why the Chinese people, even our own Northeastern persons, have been abused because they resemble the Chinese people. There has been reports of abuse on Chinese nationals because they are held to be responsible for outbreak of this COVID-19 virus. So there is no freedom from discrimination. These are just few things which I could take from the news because of the time lag. What happens to stigmatization? Because of the very nature of this virus, that it spreads so rapidly, there has been a stigma among groups of people, among individuals. People who have reported experiencing social stigma after recovering from the illness. And the worst cases were those from the health workers who were caring for the individuals with COVID-19 situation. They have reported experiencing mental health difficulty due to fear and also being stigmatized by their family and community. In November 2020, the National Human Rights Commission of Korea reported that there was around 86,451 cases of online hate speech and expression targeted towards a religious minority group. They believed that this religious minority group was responsible for the massive spread of the virus. So there was about 86,451 cases of online hate speech targeting this minority group between February and May 2020 on various social media platforms. Actually, there are even two incidents of two women belonging or supporting this religious minority group having committed suicide because they could not tolerate the spouse abuse, the abuse from their husband because they belonged or they supported this religious minority groups. These are just few of the incidences. What happens to arbitrary arrest and detention? Article 1 said all humans are free. But is the freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention even possible during the COVID-19 situation, during this pandemic? No, it did not. Emergency powers, lockdown imposed amidst the COVID-19 pandemic has been exploited by some nations and also certain persons from the nation. Taking advantage of the situation, these governments have attempted to silence and curb their political force, the human rights defenders, the journalists, and those people who went against these governments. In their report, the Freedom House reports that democracy under lockdown found evidence of police violence against civilians in almost at least 59 countries, and detention and arrest linked to pandemic response in at least 66 countries. So there has been no freedom from arbitrary arrest and detention. Since lockdown and quarantine were the only measures that is universally accepted to curb the virus, to curb the movement or the spread of the virus, it has been easily used by the powerful to arbitrarily arrest and detain the persons they did always want to do. The more vulnerable group, that is the migrants, the refugees, the asylum seekers, even they were detained, but in the name of the COVID-19 virus. Many states unlawfully and arbitrarily held migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in detention, constituting a violation of international law and human rights. According to many reports, even today, many states have continued to detain not only adults and families, but also children in immigration detention facilities amid COVID-19. Now, there was border control and quarantine, which restricted freedom of movement between nations, within the nation, because as we already know, that restriction on movement was the only known measure to prevent the spread of COVID-19 virus. But this also was used to violate the rights of really the freedom of movement. The Australian government is said to have sent hundreds of Australians after evacuating them from Wuhan during February 2020 to an immigration detention center on an island, and Christian Island, where conditions were described as being inhumane by the Australian Medical Association. But these Australians had nowhere to go but to stay in these islands as the imposition restricted by their country. In Argentina, as a state of emergency, it has restricted personal freedom, freedom from movement, and freedom from assembly to all its citizens. No legal challenges to these measures are known. It is reported the Supreme Court of Argentina has extended its annual judicial leave, and hence there is restriction to the access to the justice. As the only measure for curtailing the spread of virus was to separate people from people, there has been restriction on the freedom from assembly. The lockdown restrictions influenced the expression of freedom of assembly by imposing a limit of people that could meet at each gathering or banning any gathering. What could the corollary of this restriction mean? This corollary, the corollary of this restriction would mean that there could be no agitation against any illegal or any unlawful orders passed by any government. Then we have the right to privacy being invaded because the data being collected from various individuals who are in quarantine. We also have violations, reports of violations in the prisons. Prisons, which are always known for their inhumane conditions, which are already overcrowded, the prisons, the detention centers, their state worsened during the pandemic. The human rights organizations had to intervene in many prisons in many countries like the Cambodia, Latin America, Tanzania, for example. They had to inform the nations that they have to maintain sanitary conditions and they had to control a surge in the prisons. At one instance, the nations did not permit us to assemble, even ban. There was banning of any gathering, even to agitate against any as a response to the government's decision. But on the other hand, there was increase in the numbers of people in the prisons and the detention centers. The already overcrowded prisons and the detention centers saw more number of people put in, which could lead to health hazard to these prisoners and detainees. They had to tackle many of the prisons and the detention centers had to tackle issues like shortage of food, no health care, no hygiene, no sanitation, no proper water. So there was increase in them being pushed towards inhumane condition. On July 2020, the Human Rights Watch has reported that in Egypt, prisons were experiencing surging cases with COVID-19 and had killed at least 14 detainees. The authorities seek to stifle the news of virus spread within prisons and arresting health workers, journalists, and raised their voice regarding concerns over the government's handling of the pandemic. So at one hand, there is no freedom of expression. There is no freedom of speech. I cannot disseminate the information that the nation or our leaders or our whoever are not handling the prisons properly. In the other hand, there is increase of inhumane conditions within the prisons and detention centers. In December 2020, it was also reported that Saudi Arabia was keeping thousands of African migrants under filthy conditions in its detention centers. These detainees, when interviewed, reported that the Saudi authorities took no measures to control the spread of COVID-19 virus within the prisons, even though many of them inside the facility showed the symptoms. Coming almost to the end of my talk, we also have violations of right to private and family life. When there has to be, when the only known measure of control of the pandemic was quarantine, was isolation, there was also a necessity to know about an individual, to know about where the individual came from, where he or she would go, and if they have contracted the virus, whether they were isolated during the period of the pandemic. So compulsory COVID-19 testing of people arriving from different countries was challenged on the grounds of bodily integrity, child custody. The parents were separated from the children in many countries as a measure, but this was an invasion of right to privacy and a right to family life. Physical distancing of family from each other, social distancing rights, whether I can choose to wear masks or not. We saw all these as reported as human rights violation. But we have forgotten one very important violation, the right to education. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education has been really, really huge. UNESCO estimates that the pandemic has affected nearly 90% of the world's students. Almost 1.54 billion learners are out of school 185 countries. Despite the challenges governments face in managing this crisis, human rights law is clear that these learners retain their right to education. The governments are still obliged to ensure that these children get their education. We have talks of distance education, online education. Not even a minuscule of the population of these children who are deprived of their education are getting their education online. Many of the nations do not even have these facilities. In some countries, many countries, why some? Many countries, girl children face multiple forms of discrimination in accessing education. The girl child was already in the vulnerable lot when we talk about right to education, but this pandemic has enforced more discrimination in accessing education to these girls. They have an additional discrimination. They are expected to, now the girls are expected to take greater housework burdens. They have lesser access to internet to boys. These are all reported due to societal, familial restraints, and sometimes there are greater constraints. Many nations report that girls who are out of school are at greater risk compared to out of school boys. They face more abuse such as child marriage and other forms of gender based violence. In countries where free primary and secondary education is not guaranteed at all, only children of certain ages, many children aged out of their entitlements during the pandemic without receiving their full quality education to which they are entitled to. In countries where only 6 years of pure education are compulsory under law, children have aged out of the basic educational requirement. If a country guarantees only primary education, like in our country, what happens to those children who have now crossed the primary education program? They are in the secondary education, which is no longer compulsory or free under our constitution. So what happens to these children who did not even get their basic education? It is said COVID-19 pandemic has rolled back years of progress on human rights. Around the world, governments are failing to guarantee basic health, education, and equality. It is hitting, as we already said, the poorest, the most vulnerable, the marginalized, the hardest. Now, progress on gender equality has set back in decades, is what is reported. Violence against women and girls in all forms has skyrocketed, writes one of the articles, from online abuse to domestic violence, trafficking, sexual exploitation, and child marriage. There has been failure of national governments and the United Nations in taking decisive action to address these big global issues. The United Nations Security Council veto must not continue to be used to block action on genocide or human rights abuses, another report says. The pandemic has posed enormous and dangerous challenges and has left millions of people less secure, and more vulnerable than they were a year ago, is what the United Nations General says. He says the world is facing a pandemic of human rights abuses. I intend to end this session now, leaving you all with a thought which needs to be thought about. Did we recognize and respect the rights of our fellow human beings, or did we contribute to this human rights violation directly or indirectly? Directly by stepping upon the rights of those economically and socially vulnerable people, or indirectly by not following the medical protocol, the advisory in attending mass gatherings, political, social, or for entertainment, in not getting ourselves tested at the right time, in not getting ourselves quarantined, in not getting vaccinated, or not getting our near and dear ones vaccinated, thus aiding in the spread of the virus, which has turned into a pandemic of human rights violations, as stated, as referred to by the United Nations Secretary General. So I leave you all with a point to ponder. Were we humane enough in handling this situation, or have we contributed to this pandemic of human rights abuses? Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the wonderful insight on the beautiful subject. It was indeed a pleasure to hear you, to narrated the whole thing so beautifully. We are, in fact, made to think now about all these human rights violations and also the pandemic aspect. And in fact, it was my privilege to work with you during the moot court competitions in the college time. And the same passion and enthusiasm we can still find in you, which is, we are very lucky to have your speak today. Thank you very much for that. Before we go to the question and answer session, I would like to inform all the participants that our next webinar would be held on Monday, that's 19th July. On your screens, you could please view the invite. It is by Mr. Kiran CV, who is alumnus of Vivekananda College of Law. The next webinar is on the 19th of July, that's Monday at 7 p.m. And the topic which is chosen is protection of plant varieties and farmers.
Plant varieties and farmers' rights.
Plant varieties and farmers' rights.
Yes.
We request all of you to please join us on that day and participate in this webinar. Thank you, ma'am. I request all of participants to please join us on that day, and also I request all of you to subscribe to our YouTube page and Facebook page so that you will be able to get the access of these webinars constantly. Ma'am, with your permission, can we take a few questions by our participants?
Please do, Siddharth.
Sure. Ma'am, first question is by Kalpana ma'am. Her question is, are not
I
human...
refuse to answer Kalpana madam's questions.
But
I am not capable to answer her question.
Don't say that, Vidyulatha. You've been erudite. Yes. Kindly take my question.
She's testing you with ma'am. She's testing you with this question.
I almost feel like
no, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
May I ask? So the question that ma'am would ask, ma'am, is are not human rights mere expressions because they are hardly implemented? The so-called developed countries are also struggling. What hopes are there for developing countries?
Madam, you've chosen the right words. Human rights are just expressions. They are never guaranteed, because nobody can guarantee us anything in international law. Few countries, we have taken human rights and translated them into fundamental rights, and that we can guarantee between the citizens of our country. But in international level, they are definitely mere expressions. They are only recognized. Madam, I could say that many of us do not even have the privilege of our rights being recognized at international level. We have not achieved a level that the human rights are recognized for many individuals. So where could enforcement be? Even Italy, when we spoke about right to health, Italy, one of the most privileged country, had to choose between saving people, which is unthinkable. So I think either a developing or a developed country, violations of human rights, we all stand in the same footing. Probably the underdeveloped country where there is no recognition of human rights, they need to stand up and we need to fight for them. But otherwise, I think we are all in the same stage as of now, ma'am. It's just a thought.
Yes, thank you. The next question, ma'am, is by Bhuvneshwari, madam. Her question is, in your opinion, what is the role played by National Human Rights Commission of India in protecting the human rights during the pandemic?
Human Rights Commission again recognizes human rights. I would use the term, it does not have the teeth. It does not, the rights which are translated to fundamental rights are protected under our Constitution, Article 232 and Article 226. So Human Rights Commission did play a huge role in protecting human rights during the pandemic, but more so our high courts and our Supreme Court did play a better role, because we have the Supreme Court and the high courts have the right to enforce the human rights, which are translated as fundamental rights under Part 3 of our Constitution. So they did play, but not a major role, I could say.
Sure. The next question is Raghavendra Rao, sir. His question is, what are the government initiatives or schemes available to common man to get compensation for COVID death?
Sir, this is still being spoken around. The government still has not come, to my knowledge, it has not translated itself to a proper scheme. We are still awaiting because the measures, sir, we are not at the end of the pandemic. We are in the midst and we are awaiting the third wave. We are struggling to improve our medical facilities, to improve our healthcare facilities, to improve a lot of things. We are now in the phase of even training our doctors to tackle the third wave, if at all. So, insofar as schemes are concerned, they are yet to be announced by the central government. Few schemes, yes, are in the talks, but yet we are in the talks, sir. The central government is yet to finalize few schemes.
Sure. The next question is by Sandeep TM. The question is a little lengthy. The Latin maxim, ubi res ibi remedium, which says that there is where there is a right, there is a remedy. But if the natural rights are not incorporated in the municipal law of the land, there can be no remedy. If that is the fact, what is the utility of human rights? If no remedy is available at the disposal of the common man, what effect will declaration of human rights have on courts? Do they have moral and persuasive value only? That's the question.
What was his name?
It was Mr. Sandeep TM.
Mr. Sandeep, ubi res ibi remedium is there in common law. I agree. But this is international law. We are talking of human rights at the international level. Many countries, including India, we all know, has translated many human rights into its fundamental rights, where it can guarantee the fundamental rights, whereas internationally, it can only recognize the natural rights or the human rights. Just by thinking that there can be no remedy against the perpetuator because it is a sovereign, if United Nations had kept quiet, there would have been many wars by now, which would have led to more human rights violations. United Nations did have a role to play. All of us do have a role to play when the first step in identifying any right is we are still in the process of identifying the rights. As we already know, the vulnerable sects of many countries and many nations themselves have not been identified as having any rights. So where do we have, why should we just sit down and watch that there is no teeth, or there is no sanction, or there is no enforcement of human rights, and thus we keep quiet? No, we first identify the human rights, then we see what action can be taken against a state for violating the human rights. So this is necessary. I would say it is necessary.
Yes, ma'am. The next question we have is from Archana Halageri. She says that during the COVID, many wives have been victims of marital rape. What is your take on this, and how should it be tackled?
Of course, madam. It has been reported that the domestic violence against women was on a high rise due to the lockdown measures, the quarantine measures. What is available is the common law options, Domestic Violence Act or any other criminal procedure. But there was no other form of containing this virus. So the government had to take this measure. But again, when a measure to contain the virus is taken, the responsibility was equally cast on the government to at least take some measures to protect rights of not only the women, the children. There were many people who went hungry. There were many people who went without shelter. So abuse of any form, there were police abuses, reports of police abuses. So the state which enforced or which curtailed right of movement to an individual should have to see to it that their other rights are not violated. But it did not happen. There are huge reports of domestic violence against women. It is reported. It is true. It did not happen. The curtailment did not happen. It did happen. The violence did happen.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you. I would ask a question to you from my side. During this pandemic, ma'am, there are several orders passed by the Supreme Court and the High Court. In your opinion, ma'am, were these orders sufficient to protect human rights, or were there certain, such situations or circumstances where there were judicial outreach also?
The High Courts and the Supreme Court, I have worked with our own High Court in a batch of matters which our Honorable Chief Justice is hearing right from the beginning of the pandemic. During April 2019, 20, he has been hearing a batch of orders. A number of orders are pronounced, which led the government to take many reformative measures, right from the issue of migrants to the homeless, providing food, shelter. Many places, though I would not call it an outreach, our courts did strive hard, not in protecting human rights, but in protecting our fundamental rights. And every time an order was passed, our Honorable Chief Justice says that this is a fundamental right guaranteed under Article 21 of our Constitution. So the state better not violate it. And many of the orders have been effectively implemented, or within the constraints the government has tried to implement it. there has been a positive response from the government also. So I would not say outreach. It did try to it did try to pass orders, or it did work with the government to ensure at least few of the rights are not violated, or they're violated to a lesser extent. There are violations of fundamental rights also. When we saw the migration, the mass migration, that was violation of, because lockdown was imposed, the government did not think about the economic status of these people. Thousands went hungry, thousands went jobless overnight. The government we did not anticipate it, because we did not have a previous experience with the COVID. It is teaching us a lot of things. It is a novel coronavirus. So there was a violation, but courts did function really, really hard to contain this effect.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for answering all the questions. So, dear participants, please note that we will not be able to take any further questions due to paucity of time. We have now come to the end of the session. And before concluding the session, I would like to thank the members of the Janata Education Society, Vivekananda College of Law, the principal, the beloved professors, the staff, the technical team of the webinars, the professors of universities and law colleges who have joined us, the various alumni members who have been striving really hard and working for making this webinar successful, the advocates who have joined us, the members of the Advocates Association, the students and other participants for organizing and taking part in the webinar series. Thank you. Thank you, Anila.
Yeah, Siddharth.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Thank you.
Yeah, Vidyulatha, it is a very erudite and you collected, you did a lots of research in collecting information. It is a flow of information. You have collected lots of information across the globe, and then very nice presentation, for which I profusely thank you for educating us on all these aspects. And I profusely thank you again, Vidyulatha, and I thank Shri Shivmurthy, Treasurer of our Advocates Association Bangalore, for joining us. And I acknowledge, yeah, thank you, sir. And then I acknowledge the presence of Shri Harish N, who support us always in attending our webinars, and Shrimati Indira Gopalakrishna, our Managing Committee member of Janata Education Society, Professor Sudha, Principal, Vivupuram Law College, Professor K. Shiv Prasad, Director Academics of Bangalore Law College, Professor Rupa KV and Dr. H.G. Ravi from Vidyodaya Law College, Tumkur, Dr. Sanjeev Gowda from Vivupuram Law College, Professor Indrani from Bishop Cotton Women's Law College, and the students from various institutions, including MH Law College, Ramnagar, Bishop Cotton Law School, and then I think the students from other institutions, they have joined here. I profusely thank each one of you for your support. I expect the same support from you, and I profusely thank the Janata Education Society, the members of our governing council, for their support, and I expect the same cooperation from you people in our future endeavors also. We are planning to have some more sessions, and after celebrating 25th, and organizing 25th lectures, we are planning to end this first season of law series, the webinar series. And after a brief break, because our students, they have to prepare for the examination. Then after that, we go for second series. Even in second series also, we are planning to have many more innovative lectures from our alumnus, and including various other stakeholders like judiciary, statutory bodies like Bar Council, and then Advocates Association, academia, and many other people are there, including social activists. We are planning to invite them, and for all, I seek your cooperation in future also. Once again, I thank Vidyulatha and Siddharth. It's a nice hosting. You moderated well. I profusely thank you for your effort. And I also thank our core committee members, Srimati Pratima Vannapur, Girish Kumar CS, Raghavendra Rao, Siddharth again, and then Anil Kumar, Muniappa, and many of my friends are here, those who are helping me in organizing this program. Once again, I thank each one of you. I think our Alumni Association treasurer is your support, and I expect same cooperation from you all.